Good afternoon, and welcome to a slightly delayed episode of Diversity and Inclusion on Air from the AAVMC. Welcome to the show. This podcast is a program of the AAVMC, the Association of American Veterinary Medical Colleges, and it is a part of our Diversity Matters initiative. The podcast explores various issues related to diversity and inclusion in the veterinary profession and provides the AAVMC an opportunity to offer ongoing diversity programming to our member institutions as well as all veterinary professionals. My name is Lisa Greenhill, and I'm the Associate Executive Director for Institutional Research and Diversity at AAVMC. In today's episode, we will explore generation gaps in veterinary medicine and specifically looking at an example in academic veterinary medicine. So I'm excited to say that we are joined by two individuals from Western University of Health Sciences, Pomona, at the College of Veterinary Medicine. We have Dr. Philip Nelson, the dean of that institution, as well as Mr. soon-to-be Dr. Leo Hoagland. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So, the first question that we wanted to kind of ask each of you is, what generation do you associate yourself with, or do you even think about whether or not you are a part of a generation? So, Arturo, I'm going to actually start. I'm sorry, Arturo is our producer today, and he will maybe be asking some questions. So, Arturo, do you want to introduce yourself for a moment? Arturo, are you there? We will come back to Arturo. Hello?
Yeah, hi everyone. So my name is Arturo Munoz, and I'm currently attending California State University Fullerton, and today I'll be behind the scenes helping Dr. Greenhill with today's interview. So yeah.
Great, thank you. So Leo, actually, well, what generation are you a part of?
So I consider myself a millennial. Another, I guess, generation would be Generation Y. And I did a little research trying to see the specific date. So according to Google, it's usually between, if you were born between the 80s up to the mid 90s is what the consensus is. All so right, I fall in that group.
What the Google says. And so Dr. Nelson.
I'm a baby boomer.
You're a baby boomer. Okay. Yeah. All right. So I'm curious, do you actually buy into the hype that there actually are generation gaps?
I guess you know. Yes. I guess the word gap is probably a little challenging. I do believe there are differences between generations, and that those differences are induced by the experiences that a certain generation has to go through. My parents lived through World War II. I lived through the political era of the Vietnam War. I was born during the Korean War, but the Vietnam War had a significant impact on me personally, because I came of age for the draft just as it was being ended, and it was a scary prospect to grow up knowing that you might have to go to war, and making war a much more personal issue if you were most likely to be drafted into the Army and then sent overseas for a limited war or police action, if you will. Those kind of things have a dramatic impact on your views toward work, toward war, toward college, and if you don't have those things in your life, if you don't have those challenges or those fears, then you're allowed to focus on other things that might have just as much of an impact, but may impact you differently. So I think those things lead to the differences that you see in between generations, and they call that a gap. Lisa, your mic is muted.
Thank you. So, Leo, how do you see a gap manifesting? I mean, I guess that would be 2 generations later. So I consider myself an Xer, Gen Xer. And so there was very few kind of major wars when I was coming up. Your experience in life, I would assume, would be a bit different given our involvement in various conflicts around the world. So how do you see, based on what Dr. Nelson has kind of described, do you see that as impacting you and your generation differently? And how do you see those gaps, air quote, kind of bumping up against these other types of generations?
Yeah, I do feel that there are gaps or differences, whatever you want to call them, and it's just the social, political environment that you grew up in, and again, growing up, I didn't grow up during a war. I didn't have the fear of getting drafted, so I feel that depending on the time frame you grew up when, you are focused on, you're allowed to focus on different things. And growing up myself, at least my generation, I feel that we got the tail end of the technology boom. So feeling myself and most of my classmates that are around my age, I feel that we're very tech savvy / independent, whereas some of the older generations either don't understand it or stay away from technology. And so those are major differences on how we learn, how we interact with each other, how we communicate. And so I do feel that those differences can be a hinder, but they can also, depending on how we use them, they can be a bridge in communication and understanding each other.
Okay. So how does this play out in a classroom? When you have 100 or so would be millennials in class, the school is wired up, and you have a population of digital natives potentially being taught by someone who isn't a digital native. Has your experience been that those generations, those probably multiple generations of folks that are teaching you or have taught you, since you'll be graduating soon, how adaptive have they been during your experience in school?
Well, for the most part, I feel that our faculty they've embraced the way that I guess we learn. The good thing with our program, I can't say that for the other schools, is we're very student-based learning. So it gives us the opportunity for us as individuals to teach or I don't want to say teach, but study and look at material the way that we like it. Whereas some of the more didactic campuses, you're stuck in a lecture room, and then you have to absorb what the professor has to tell you. So I feel that at least the student-based learning does allow for that fluidity in the teaching styles. And as far as like communication, so myself, I like to communicate through email and text versus in person or phone call. So I feel like communicating with professors that way allows me to open up and address more issues that way, that I feel more comfortable. And I feel that most of the professors do respond to email, and so that communication, at least for myself, I can't speak for all my classmates or for all the students, but has been a good compromise.
Okay. So, Dr. Nelson, I'm kind of curious about, you've been at a number of different institutions, so I'm kind of curious about what you've seen over the course of your career, and how have various kinds of gaps maybe manifested, and how do you think I don't want you to speak totally on behalf of your dean colleagues, but I would kind of be curious about your thoughts because Western certainly does use a different type of model that is often talked about. Kind of how does that compare in terms of facilitating dialogue across generations?
So if I just to make sure I'm responding correctly, I think I heard two different questions. One was what have I noticed in the evolution of the gaps?
Yes.
Since I'm so old, and the second is what is my impression of how technology has impacted our delivery of education.
Yes, and because you're so wise, not old.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. See, I heard the word seasoned the other day, and I felt like a well-done steak. But anyway, I think that, when I first started in academia, I was the same age as most of the students that were in veterinary school. And so that's a very poignant question for me, because there was no gap when I started in academia as an assistant professor, and I got caught up in that change. I mean, you're hearing people say that the students seem to be getting younger and younger every year. Well, that definitely happened to me, because I stayed in academia. I started. I began to become introduced to changes in workflow and how we approached communication. And I remember when I was at Mississippi State in the late 90s. Well, first of all, I should go back to when I was there in the early 80s, when we were the first school to require students to buy a computer. And at that time, there was a lot of concern about whether or not they were wasting their money buying computers, because there wasn't a lot of software for them to use. But we thought we saw the need for them to become facile in computer technology, and so we required them to buy the first Mac that came out as part of their curriculum, rather than surgical instruments. We provided that and made them buy a computer instead, and learn how to use it as part of their studies. I was amazed at how quickly they adapted to it. One of the generation gaps that I see is between me and my grandchild, because at that time when I was buying computers, I would not allow my children to freely access the computers because they might mess it up. And yet, and at the time they were 3 times as expensive as they are now, and you could essentially root a computer through the software because it was that fragile. Now my 3-year-old grandchild will take an iPad and test out anything she wants and has no fear in doing that because of the advances in technology. And I'm always amazed at how easily she adapts to the human-computer interface, and that has definitely been transmitted in the classroom itself. I don't know if you realize this, but this year, the kids that were born when Facebook was established they're coming to college this year. This is the year that we truly are going to start educating digital natives, people who have been comfortable with communicating by Facebook all of their lives, not just 75% of their lives, ever since they've been on the planet. And even though Leo has just told you how comfortable he is in communicating with technology, I'm still not sure we know how to communicate civilly or without significant risk using digital media. There's an article that I talked to you about that I just read, entitled "The Cuddling of America's Minds," and in it they talk about the fact that many professors are now fearful of what they might say in the classroom because of the way students now use social media to either out or rave about their courses and their professors. And the baby boomer professors are concerned about how their reputations are going to be handled in the hands of millennials as they use social media to rate their courses. And so these are some of the challenges that we're going to get. And because the digital natives are so comfortable with this technology, they are not yet as skeptical or concerned about the potential risks that come with it. And so we are having to deal with those challenges as well, even though we think we have a more open environment when it comes to the use of technology here. Would you agree with that, Leo?
I would, yeah. I can see there have been instances some of the professors have been more hesitant to use the social media platforms in fear of something going out and getting retribution that way. So I do see that point.
Well, so what you've described, Dean Nelson, I guess the next step then might be how do you see that playing out? So you've got a bunch of this next generation of veterinary students coming in 2 to 4 years at some of our schools, and for some of our international members, they're going next year. They'll be here this fall or next year, and it sounds that because of their comfort and the comfort with having so much information and commentary available to them and available for distribution, that there potentially is some friction there with particularly boomers who, if they're like my mom and dad, whom I adore, are like, I don't want to be on the face page. Take me off of the face page.
Yeah.
So how will you as a leader lead your students and your faculty to kind of bridge that gap?
That's a good question. I don't know. I think the first thing we have to do is dispel ourselves of the fear of Armageddon. That even though we may have some concern about the digital natives not being concerned enough about privacy issues, etc., what we really should be looking at are the advantages that we can gain in applying these new technologies, because they far outweigh the risks, and we can't stop that movement, even if we wanted to. And I don't think I'm not suggesting that we should want to. I think that the millennials and the generations behind them are going to force us to start meeting their demands for more efficient transfer of information, for more independent approaches to learning that information, and for different ways of assessing their competence in ways that will reduce their cost to achieving these degrees. And the moment we accept that, I think the virtual walls will rise, and the actual walls that maybe maybe enclosing nothing in terms of the primal institutions that we venerate so well now. I'm actually challenging our faculty to look at our curriculum again and to come up with ways of delivering at least half of our curriculum virtually in order to lower the cost to our students. If our students can stay home 3/4 of the year and then be assessed for competency, and that may require, at the moment, visits to the campus rather than living near the campus, then suddenly our campus becomes accessible to the East Coast, much more accessible to students on the East Coast, or internationally, if you will. If all we're talking about is a plane ticket 3 to 4 times a year in order to be assessed.
So, Leo, if you had it all to do again and that type of program was available, would you consider doing a program like that?
I feel like that's very, the way that I learn is learning on my own, and then having that reassurance with having the fallback with professors asking questions and stuff. So if that is available, and it does save me, because the one thing that most of my classmates are worried about, and this is throughout, no matter what degree your students are talking about, is the tuition debt that we come out of. If we can bridge that, then I wouldn't see why a lot of students wouldn't sign up for programs like that.
Wow. So, Dean Nelson, what you've described for some out in the profession is tantamount to heresy. So, and in fact, some folks know that I actually studied this particular issue, aspects of this issue, in my own dissertation, and I found that veterinary leaders of all of the different types of education models, the one that they were most skeptical of was distance or online learning. And, you know, I certainly sit in meetings, and those discussions have evolved, but we still have quite a few folks in the profession that believe online learning is a YouTube video, and that's really kind of it. Like, instead of the lecturer standing there giving you the lecture, you're able to watch it on YouTube, and that really is the extent of it. So, you know, I'm kind of curious about this idea of these things that really for much of education are not novel anymore. How do you think your colleagues, and I mean really kind of way out in the field, not certainly just in academia, but you know, I'm kind of curious to know what you think. Is veterinary medicine ready for this?
Well, whether they're ready or not, we're going to have to move in that direction. And I don't know how fast that's going to occur. So let me say first that I realize that, you know, how close to heresy that the idea that I just proposed sounds. But sometimes when you're describing an idea, you're not able to properly accentuate the issues that cause concern. The things that people are concerned about are, and I don't mean to diminish the importance of their concerns. Competency-based education allows us to focus on the competencies themselves. And once we do that, we can think of a number of approaches to assure the quality of our graduates. And it's not as simple as whether it's going to be a lecture face-to-face lecture or an online transfer of information. Veterinary medicine is as much a technical training program as it is a theoretical program. We expect our graduates to be able to do surgical procedures on day one. And for the good of the patient and the client, we have to make sure that we provide assurance that they're ready to do what we say that they do. And that is going to require, as Leo said, some type of interaction with the faculty. It can't be all virtual. And so usually what happens in these discussions, it's all or nothing. You know, it's and that's not what we're proposing here. What we're proposing is, as we learn to apply these technologies, how do we do it in ways that both addresses the cost of education without diminishing the assurance of the quality of the competencies? And that's the challenge, you know. And Leo mentioned the tuition costs, but half of the cost, half of the debt that our students incur are living costs, and you know, it's not all tuition. And if we can reduce either or both of those costs, we've moved the needle. And so we should be looking not just at how we instruct, but where the student learns. And when there are only 31 accredited veterinary institutions within the United States border, then we have to figure out how do we get a population of 320 million people, where 1% of them might want to be veterinarians, access to the veterinary community, to those veterinary institutions. That's our goal. Mm-hmm. With, you know, but we have to always maintain the quality of the profession.
Absolutely. So I want to switch gears a little bit. Leo, I'm going to put you on the spot. I'm kind of curious to know, what are you, you'll be graduating in, 8 days, 10 days? I'm sorry, 11 days, I think it is. So I'm looking at my calendar. So what do you plan on doing, and how do you see, you know, what do you see you and your colleagues who are millennials doing maybe differently? What kinds of ways do you conceptualize veterinary medicine through your own generational lens?
Well, I'll be starting a lab animal PhD residency program in July.
Congrats.
Thank you. I feel, well, I want to say that at least with a lot of the classmates and a lot of students my age going into the field, I feel that we see, and I guess this is what my experience going through fourth year and having the distributive model, working with preceptors that are some generations below us, is we kind of had to forge the communication gaps now, so we had a little head start compared to some of the other schools. So, and it's just so the future employers that we seek, working with them on day one, that they're going to want to do stuff one way. We are going to need to bridge that gap and say, yes, we understand, but have you considered doing this? And so that was a good experience going through fourth year, is going to the different clinical sites and working with so many different preceptors, that it kind of gave us a good understanding on how we can communicate with fellow colleagues and also mentors and future employers. So I feel that, at least with our generation, I feel that, I don't want to generalize, but I think that we're a good team player generation. We can say that we don't have an issue taking multiple team job roles in order to get the job done, and I think that is a benefit for us going into the work field.
Okay, Good deal. So I actually do have a generational differences chart, and I am going to read a few of these kind of characteristics because I'm kind of curious about your reactions to them, characteristics and core values. So some of the characteristics for baby boomers. You have a high ability to handle a crisis, you're ambitious, you challenge authority, you're competitive, there's a bend towards consensus leadership, there are good communication skills, you're idealistic, you're loyal, and you are multitaskers. You're also very optimistic and willing to take on and accept responsibility. So, Dean Nelson,
Mm.
is that
Yeah.
you?
I resemble that remark. No, I think everything but multitasking. I don't consider myself a multitasker. I do get involved in a lot of activities, but I don't necessarily think I do well trying to do two or three of them at one time. But other than that, I don't take issue with any of the others. Most of them are compliments to me if I actually am what they say I am. I do strive to be all of those things, and I think that's what's important. Those are my values. It would take someone else to say that I was loyal, even though I strive to be loyal. But whether I actually make it or not, I think depends on the person or institution that I'm supposed to be loyal to.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's difficult for me to give myself those same characteristics, and I don't, and not being a person who studies generations or generational differences, I'm not the person to say that that's my generation necessarily. I do think that we're competitive. We've always been, my generation has always been competitive, and we've always had, unlike what Leo said, we were not necessarily trained to be part of a team. I think that was unique. That was unique in our generation. I think some of us saw it, and I think there were certain areas that we accepted it. If we got drafted into the armed forces or joined the armed forces, we realized we were going to be part of a team. But when we went to vet school, most of us expected to be in a solo practice. That has changed over the generations, and I'm particularly intrigued to hear Leo say that he, at least, and he believes a lot of his peers want to be part of a team, which is consistent with the changes in veterinary medicine or in delivery of healthcare in general, and that bodes well for what we're trying to do in making the profession more efficient and more effective in delivery of healthcare.
Okay, good deal. All right, I'm going to come back to this issue of change, but first I'm going to read off some attributes from my list for millennials. So Leo, I'll give you a chance to comment on whether or not these kind of speak to your soul or not. So millennials are ambitious but not entirely focused, at ease in teams, diversity focused. You have not really ever lived without computers. You're eager to spend money. You're fiercely independent. There's really a greater focus on family, children, and friendships than on work. You are greatly indulged by fun-loving parents. You are high-speed stimulus junkies. That's kind of interesting. You're innovative. You're loyal. You're sociable. There is that me-first attitude in work life, again, which is that you're more focused on non-work activities. You're highly scheduled, even for fun things. Very tech-savvy. And you think that mature generations are cool.
Um, I would say I would agree with half of those things. I do want to talk about the selfish or that we're selfish. I don't think that's a true. I mean, it might be to other generations, but I think that we at least for my viewpoint, I feel that we try to we want a balanced life, so we're not gonna dedicate our entirety to work. We do want to have a social and spend time with family. So I think if that's being selfish, then I guess that could be construed from other generations who were and this just seeing my parents who were more focused on work and getting ahead and moving their family ahead than spending time with their families. So they put work first, and I guess growing up like that, then we saw that we didn't want that for our families or for our friends or how we want to raise the next generation. So I think it's coming from that perspective that we switched that viewpoint of yes, we do want to work and be independent, but we don't want to I guess leave the other social or our family friends behind just to get ahead and work. So I think that I would say it's more of a balance thing than anything. So that I don't agree with. But for the other parts, I mean, there's always going to be differences, and I don't know who came up with that list, but but I'm assuming it wasn't a millennial. But yeah, it's going to be how your perspective. So
Sure. I didn't mention that the millennials are also kind of characterized by having, it says, the helicopter parents. And, I think that it's interesting because there are, and Al will share this list of different kinds of values and attributes of traditionalist boomers, Gen X's, and millennials on the show notes. But, some of the things that I see, particularly in the millennial listing, seem to be at odds. And so it'll be kind of interesting to see how that group changes over time. And so one of the things that I see in the boomer descriptors are that boomers were originally skeptical of authority, but as boomers age, they become far more similar to traditionalists. Time equals authority. And so I'm kind of curious, Dr. Nelson, about your thoughts on do you see generations kind of maturing to be more similar as we all age? The closer we get to the banana peel moment, are we more similar or are we more different?
That's a good question because I can't, I think I can't tell you if we're more similar to the preceding generation at this age or not. I do know the intuitive response is we become more acceptable of authority because we become authority. As we age, and therefore whatever changes we were able to make when we were young, that was our contribution, and now it's time to stop fighting, and it's time, and now we have to administer it. We now have to run the show. And then we'll turn it over. I guess that's a good question. I guess that's a good question for Leo to answer in the next 20, 30 years. I would like to address, though, that, there are certain trigger words you have in those generational characterizations. I know that baby boomers tend to cringe when millennials are described as being more concerned about their family and than baby boomers. When baby boomers' interpretation is we are devoted to work because of our focus on family, and we're willing to make that sacrifice for family, and that's how we rationalize the hard work. But it's also how we rationalize the selfishness of millennials. And when I have discussions with practitioners who have millennials who don't want to stay an extra hour in practice, or don't want to do emergency work a certain night, or they don't understand it because they see it as a career killer. They see it as, well, you know, are you going to be satisfied with what you're doing now? I mean, don't you want to show us what you could be? Aren't you willing to invest in this practice? And it is from their perspective of how they see life and how they approach the family, and it becomes interpreted as a selfish motive, or a immediate gratification motive rather than an investment approach. And that's a major difference, I think. But they both value family. You know, I don't think, you know, I don't see it as selfish at all. In some cases, I think we're also a little envious that we weren't able to do that, because it was our sellout to the culture that we were brought into, and as much as we claim to have been rebellious of authority, we sure sucked it up in, you know, and bought into that particular pedagogy. So, you know, I just think it's the values are, I think, and Lisa, you said this all along, the values are generally the same. It's how we approach those values that are different.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So thank you. So in our last couple of minutes, I want to give each of you an opportunity to speak to the younger version of yourself. So, Leo, we're going to start with you. So you are on your way out of vet school, and in a couple of years, or again internationally this year, the Generation Z, I think is what they're calling them now, will be entering undergrad as well as professional programs. So in all of your generational wisdom, what advice and wise words might you impart to the future you?
Let's see. I would say, as far as trying, I guess one thing I can say to be the most effective is try different modes of communication, or communicating with, let's say, your colleagues, professors, future employers, because I think bridging that gap in communication and understanding their viewpoint will help you in the long run, not only for you to get where you want to go, and also to help the other party understand your viewpoint. So I feel that sometimes we, as a younger generation, try to stick with our stances too much, and we try to I don't want to say burn bridges, but we tend to get a little rattled when people don't want to understand our viewpoints. But again, it's just going back, they're not understanding us, we're understanding them. So I would think my words of wisdom would be try different modes of communication with people, and you'll find a way of mutual understanding and common ground that you can bridge that gap.
All right. No Twitter fingers. So, Dean Nelson, what words of wisdom do you have for Xers, Ys, Millennials, and Zs?
Oh, okay, so I have a different question. You don't want me to talk to my young self?
Yes.
Well, you know, if I were a member of that generation, I would have to say, you know, to trust yourself. Make sure that you understand who you are, and to find solace in the need to take care of yourself. Do not let others set your timeline for you. It is not the there are no pat answers, and more and more the rigid timelines that we are used to are slowly devolving. And so set your own goals, do it in your time, and be true to your own values.
That's great advice for everybody. So on that note, I think that we will wrap this show. So thank you both, Leo and Phil, for joining us this afternoon. It's been a really interesting conversation. This podcast will be available on YouTube shortly after the show ends, and show notes, an annotated version of the show will be available in a few days. So thank you so much for joining us. Be sure to join us later this month when Dr. Michael Blackwell joins us to talk about access to care issues in veterinary medicine. And as a heads up, we have some really exciting programming coming this summer, including a series of shows devoted to issues around holistic admissions and what does that mean for the future of veterinary medicine. So on that note, thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you later this month.